tracks, their fur crawling with unseen killers.
Take a slow breath. Let the noise of your day fall away. Tonight, we're not going to race through battles or crown kings in golden halls. No. Tonight, you and I are going to slip into a darker corner of history, one that doesn't sparkle, one that doesn't inspire glory songs, but one that presses on the edge of survival itself. Imagine waking up, not in your familiar bed, but on a sagging straw mattress in the year 1347. You are not a knight, not a queen, not a figure in a stained glass window. You are simply you alive, unprepared, and breathing air that could, quite literally, kill you. The sounds outside your door are ordinary enough. The shuffle of hooves, the creak of a cart, children shouting as they run barefoot through mud. But every ordinary thing you see and smell is wrapped around an invisible threat. And let's talk about the smell for a moment. Because history is full of grand paintings that never bothered to capture the stench. Step outside and you're hit with it instantly, manure baked into the stree. Wood smoke curling from low chimneys, sweat clinging to everyone who owns a body, and waste human and animals loshed into open ditches. If you've ever wrinkled your nose at an overflowing trash bin in summer, double it, triple it, and then accept that you don't get to walk away. This is home. This is daily life. Now, to be fair, disease was already a house guest in this world, long before the Black Death made its grand entrance. Dysentery, smallpox, tuberculosis, these were not exotic words. They were regular visitors. If you lived to see adulthood, you were already beating the odds. No antibiotics, no hand sanitizer, not even the faintest notion of a germ. Illness was explained as bad air, or a misbalance of humours, or most convincingly God's punishment. So when a new sickness came creeping, people didn't reach for science. They reached for incense, for prayers, for leeches. Spoiler, none of it worked. But I don't want to rush us to the catastrophe yet. First, take in the texture of a medieval street. Narrow, shadowed, choked with people and animals pressed shoulder to shoulder. This is not a world where you can keep 6 feet of distance. Privacy is scarce, space is scarce, and sanitation is non-existent. Rats live under your floorboards. Fleas bite at your ankles. Pigs snuffle through garbage piles. And you just get on with it. Because what else are you going to do? And yet within this constant gamble of living, something smaller than sight has already begun to stir. A bacterium, Yersinia pestis, is lurking in the fur of rodents, traveling with fleas that are about to grow desperate. You don't know its name. No one does. But in the weeks and months ahead, its presence will spread like spilled ink across a map. So tonight, you and I are going to walk together into that map. We'll follow the fleas and the rats, the ships and the caravans, the frightened prayers and the shallow graves. We'll see how ordinary life mud, trade, gossip turned into a stage for the deadliest pandemic Europe had ever seen. Dim your lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that steady hum. And let's begin. You've just woken in the year 1347, and though you don't know it yet, you're standing at the threshold of the Black Death. Step outside with me, into the daylight of your medieval street. The first thing you notice isn't what you see, it's what you smell. It clings to you instantly, as though the air itself has been stewing in an unwashed pot for weeks. Smoke from damp wood, the sour musk of animals, rotting vegetable peels left to collapse in a corner, and waste poured casually into the gutter. There are no garbage men, no pipes to whisk things away. The street is the sewer, the trash pit, and the playground, all at once. Look left, and you'll see a row of houses built so tightly they almost lean on one another for balance. The upper floors jut out overhead, shutting out much of the sunlight, so that the lane is trapped in a kind of permanent twilight. Here and there, thin spears of light pierce down, striking wet cobbles, puddles, and heaps of straw. That straw is not for comfort. It's scattered on purpose, to soak up whatever people throw from their windows' slops, chamber pot contents, the water from washing turnips. By nightfall, it's filthy. By morning, time 0865's, it's soggy again. And everywhere, animals. They are not in barns or pens. They live here with you. A pig ambles past, snorting at the refuse. Chickens flutter up in alarm as a cart rolls by. A dog noses into a heap, pulling out something half-decayed and running proudly down the lane. Horses clatter through, leaving behind their own steaming contribution to the mix. Cats stalk the edges of all this chaos, thin and quick, slipping into shadows with tails flicking like arrows. This is not unusual. It is life. Now let your eyes linger a little longer between the larger animals. Smaller shapes dart and disappear. Rats. Always rats. Bold, fast, and utterly unbothered by your presence. They scuttle across the rafters of houses at night, gnaw grain sacks in storerooms, nest in hay, slip beneath doors as if the world is theirs to share. And in many ways, it is. Medieval people do not launch campaigns against them. They shrug and accept. Rats are simply part of the background, as ordinary as the pigeons you ignore on modern sidewalks. But these rats are not ordinary. They are the vessels, the dark ships carrying passengers you cannot see. Their fur and skin host fleas, small specks so common you barely register them. Every household knows fleas. They bite. They itch. They make sleep restless. But no one believes they are anything more than a nuisance. They are, in fact, the most dangerous creatures in the world at this moment. For in their tiny guts lurks a bacterium, Yersinia pestis, waiting to spill out. Here's how it happens. A flea feeds on a rat already carrying plague. The bacteria multiply inside the flea's stomach until it clogs. Hungry, frantic, the flea tries to feed again, but nothing passes through. So it bites, and in its frenzy, it spits infected blood back into the wound. It is not malicious. It is starving. But for the victim rat, pig, or humanity's death beginning. Picture the chain reaction. One rat sickens and dies in a corner. Fleas leap off, seeking warmth and food. They find another rat, another animal, or perhaps a person stretched out on a rough mat. A single leap, a single bite. That's all it takes. Within days, fever flares. A lump swells beneath the skin, and the clock starts ticking. The victim does not know it yet, but time has already shortened. And what makes it worse, no one has the faintest idea of what's happening. Ask a doctor, and you'll hear about miasma, poisoned air drifting in with the wind. To protect themselves, they burn bundles of herbs, their smoke curling sweetly in alleys. They carry pomanders filled with cloves and lavender, pressing them to their noses as though scent could stand guard against death. They believe bad air can be overpowered by good air. It cannot. Ask a priest, and he'll speak of sin, of God's anger, of repentance required. So people march in processions, whip their own backs bloody, or lock themselves in prayer. None of it works. All the while, rats keep breeding, fleas keep biting, and the plague keeps whispering its way forward. Imagine yourself here, trying to live in these streets. You scratch at bites on your ankle. You wrinkle your nose at the smell. You swat at something darting across the room in the dark. You think nothing of it. Everyone lives this way. To you, it's not horror, it's Tuesday. And yet, every detail of this world, the filth, the crowding, the vermin has created the perfect highway for catastrophe. Time ones, think about how modern cities panic over a clogged sewer, or how quickly news spreads if a restaurant fails a health inspection. Entire businesses can collapse over a rumor of cockroaches. Now, erase all of that oversight, all of that sanitation, all of those rules. Replace it with acceptance. This is the backdrop against which the Black Death will march. It does not need an army. The army already lives here, beneath your floorboards. The most haunting thought? Medieval people weren't entirely wrong. The air did feel poisoned. Walk through these streets, and it fills your lungs with stink so thick you can almost chew it. They called it bad air, and in a way, it was. Just not in the way they imagined. Because while they blamed the sky, the truth lay much closer to the ground crawling, biting, breeding in the dark. So when we talk about the beginning of the Black Death, we are not starting with a dramatic trumpet blast of doom. We're starting with rats, fleas, and filth. We're starting with ordinary life, because that's what made the plague so unstoppable. It grew out of the things people didn't question, the things they lived with every day. The clutter of bodies in the street, the constant presence of vermin, the unquestioned smell of rot. All the little background details of survival would become the stage on which death itself performed. And now that stage is set. The actors are already in position, the rats in the rafters, the fleas in their fur, the people going about their lives unaware. The curtain hasn't yet risen, but it will. And when it does, the entire world of these crowded streets will change forever. You and I are going to leave the cramped alleys of your medieval town for a moment and stretch our gaze outward. Because the Black Death didn't appear in Europe as if conjured by a curse. It had a journey, a road of its own, and that road was long, winding, and paved with trade. Imagine the Silk Road, that great artery of connection between East and West. Caravans plod along dusty tracks, loaded with silks, spices, porcelain, and the promise of wealth. Camels sway under their burdens, bells clinking softly in the dry air. Merchants talk in dozens of tongues. Time 0.65s, trading not only goods, but also stories, rumors, songs. Wherever people move, so too do the creatures that cling to them. Rats burrow into grain sacks. Fleas ride unnoticed on fur and fabric. No one invites them, yet they travel for free, the eternal stowaways of history. Now bring your focus eastward, to the vast empire forged by the Mongols. By the mid-14th century, they had carved out a realm that stretched across Asia, binding lands together in one vast political system. This was Pax Mongolica, the so-called Mongol peace, which allowed caravans to move more easily, traders to travel more safely, and cultures to collide more quickly. It was a time of movement, of exchange. And like every great exchange, it carried shadows along with treasures. Some historians argue that the plague found its footing here, in the heart of the Mongol Empire, perhaps emerging from rodent populations in Central Asia. Imagine the steppe, wide, endless grasslands, where marmots and other small creatures burrow and thrive. The bacteria Yersinia pestis lived there quietly, a part of nature's cycle. But once trade brought more contact, once caravans began to stitch the world together, the disease had new highways to travel. What had once been a local affliction could now become a continental disaster. And so the plague began to creep westward, hidden in the fur of rats that gnawed at caravan goods, in the fleas that nested unnoticed. With every mile, it travelled closer to the Mediterranean, closer to the bustling cities of Europe, closer to you. But the story is not complete without one infamous moment, a tale told again and again in chronicles and lectures, the siege of Kaffa. Picture it, the year is 1346, in the Crimean port city of Kaffa, on the northern coast of the Black Sea. It is a Genoese outpost, a vital link in Mediterranean trade, and it has drawn the attention of the Mongols. Armies gather outside its walls. The clash is not unusual. War and sieges are common enough in these centuries. But this siege is different. Inside the Mongol camp, men begin to die. Not from swords, not from arrows, but from something darker, something invisible. Buboes swell. Fevers rage. Bodies collapse. The Mongols, stricken with the plague, watch as the disease rips through their ranks. And then, according to one chronicler, they make a grim, almost unthinkable decision. They use the very corpses of their fallen comrades as weapons. With catapults, they hurl the rotting bodies over the walls of Kaffa, sending death itself arcing through the air. Now pause with me here. Whether this account is perfectly accurate or embellished by horrified imagination, it is often cited as one of the earliest known instances of biological warfare. Think of the horror inside the city walls, the sound of corpses hitting rooftops, the stench of decay raining down, the realization that the enemy was not just outside the gates, but already inside their streets. Panic spread faster than arrows ever could. The Genoese merchants, desperate to escape, fled aboard their ships. They believed they were leaving death behind, but they carried it with them, tucked invisibly into their cargo holds, into the fur of rats, into the bodies of sailors who coughed and shivered as the sea wind filled their sails. They did not know it yet, but they had become couriers for catastrophe. Now, imagine standing on one of those ships. The sea stretches out endlessly, the deck creaks beneath your feet, and the horizon glows with promise. You think you have outrun disaster. But somewhere below, in the dark belly of the vessel, rats scurry across grain sacks. Fleas leap from one host to another, and the plague keeps traveling west. By the time those ships reach ports in Sicily, in Messina, the disease will step ashore. From there, it will no longer need ships. It will find horses, carts, traders, pilgrims. It will move like smoke, seeping into every corner of Europe. What makes this story so haunting is not just the siege or the shipsits, the inevitability of it. The world of the 14th century was more connected than ever before. Trade routes crisscrossed continents. Markets drew crowds from every direction. Ideas, goods, and wealth flowed quickly. And into that same current slipped a killer too small to see. Think of your own time for a moment. Planes streak across skies every day, carrying thousands of passengers. Within hours, someone can board in one city and land half a world away, breathing the same recycled air as hundreds of strangers. We've seen how quickly disease can follow these paths. The 14th century was no different in principle, only slower in pace. Caravans instead of planes, ships instead of trains. The pattern is the same. Connection brings prosperity, but it also brings risk. So here we are, standing at the hinge of the story. The plague has found its way into the bloodstream of trade, into the bloodstream of armies, and now into the bloodstream of Europe. The siege of Kaffa is the flare on the horizon, the first visible spark of a firestorm that will soon sweep across entire kingdoms. And as the sails fill with wind and the ships leave that cursed port, the fate of millions is already sealed. The Black Death is no longer a distant shadow. It is on the move. It is coming. And you are about to see what happens when invisible passengers step ashore. Imagine the horizon of the Mediterranean in late 1347. Ships from the Black Sea appear, their sails billowing, their hulls heavy with grain, goods, and something far darker. They dock at the port of Messina, in Sicily. Crowds gather to unload, to haggle, to trade. But aboard those ships are sailors already coughing, sweating, trembling with fever. Rats skitter down the ropes onto the docks. Fleas leap unseen. Within days, the city feels it, a sickness that kills faster than rumor can explain. Messina tries to push the ships away, to order them back out to sea. But it is too late. The disease is already on shore. From here, the Black Death takes Europe like a storm. Picture a map in your mind. Sicily first, then the Italian mainland. Genoa, Venice, Florence. These cities are jewels of trade, crossroads of culture. They're also perfect launch pads for contagion. Streets are crowded, houses pressed close, and movement never stops. Merchants come and go. Pilgrims arrive. Soldiers march. Every journey carries rats. Every sack of grain carries fleas. The plague spreads not in weeks, but in days. Florence, that proud city of bankers and artists, collapses under the weight. Giovanni Boccaccio, who lived through it, described bodies stacked like cordwood, families abandoning one another in terror. He wrote of neighbors who refused to speak across a doorway, of mothers leaving children, of priests who vanished from their flocks. All fellowship was dead, he wrote. The words echo across centuries, because in panic, human bonds snap. Move northward. By early 1348, the plague crosses the Alps. France reels under the blow. Paris, a city of scholars and churches, fills with the sound of death carts. Whole parishes go silent. Chroniclers struggle to count the dead, because counting itself becomes impossible. In some places, half the city perishes before a season turns. In Avignon, home of the papacy at that time, burial grounds overflow. They consecrate new cemeteries, bless rivers, even declare entire fields holy, just so the dead can be laid somewhere. The papal court, desperate for safety, sits between fires literally, great bonfires set around the palace in hopes of purifying the air. The smoke chokes, but it does nothing to stop the fleas. Westward again, into Spain, The plague moves with frightening speed. Cities collapse into grief and suspicion. Rumors swirl. Was it poisoned wells? Was it the wrath of heaven? People lash out at minorities, scapegoating those who are easiest to blame. Communities fracture under fear, and cruelty multiplies alongside corpses. Now turn your eyes across the English Channel. In 1348, ships bring the plague into the ports of Dorset. From there, it spreads inland. London, with its heaving population, narrow lanes, and crowded markets, becomes a cauldron. Corpses pile faster than they can be buried. So many die that they dig enormous pits outside the city walls, common graves where hundreds are lowered together, day after day. Bells toll until the sound itself becomes unbearable. A London chronicler wrote that people died so quickly that servants left their masters, parents left their children, husbands left their wives. Fear outweighed love. Time, 65s, everything. And still it spreads. Scotland suffers next, then Ireland, though in uneven patterns. The disease does not march in a perfect line. It jumps, it skips, it flares, following trade, following travel, following life itself. Think of the pace. Imagine how, in your own time, a virus spread across continents by airplanes in mere weeks. In the 14th century, there are no airplanes. There are horses, ships, carts, footsteps. And time, 65s, within just a few years, the plague sweeps from the Black Sea to the Atlantic. That speed is staggering when you consider the slower rhythms of the medieval world. The physical devastation is one thing. The psychological devastation is another. Villages watch their neighbors vanish. Cities lose half their people in a season. Everywhere, the sound of digging, the sight of smoke from funeral pyres, the smell of decay drifting through streets. Imagine walking through your neighborhood and realizing that half the doors will never open again. Imagine hearing silence where once there was laughter, work. Song. The plague was not just a sickness, it was an erasure. But even amid despair, people tried to explain, to control, to make sense of it. Doctors scribbled theories, priests thundered sermons, towns issued orders. Some cities attempted quarantine, shutting gates, forbidding strangers from entering. Others demanded processions of prayer. But the plague slipped past all barriers, indifferent to borders, unmoved by ritual. It flowed wherever life flowed. And so Europe bent under the weight. Sicily, Italy, time 65s, France, Spain, England, each struck in turn. Each convinced for a moment that perhaps the worst had passed, only to find it had only begun. Step back with me now and look again at the map. Picture it glowing, not with light, but with shadow. From the Black Sea, the shadow spreads, spilling into the Mediterranean, climbing into Italy, rolling across France, leaping into England, fanning out into every direction. No kingdom untouched, no village secure. By the early 1350s, the Black Death is everywhere, and the world of Europe is forever changed. Close your eyes for a moment and listen. Bells. Endless bells. They toll for the dead, again and again, until the sound itself becomes unbearable. Imagine living in a city where the bells never stop. How long before you stop listening? How long before you stop caring? This is Europe in the grip of the Black Death. And what you see first is not courage, it's collapse. Families break apart. Parents abandon sick children. Children flee from their dying parents. Husbands vanish from their wives' bedsides. Of course, not everyone there were acts of fierce devotion too, people staying until their last breath. But the stories that remain, written by trembling hands, tell of Charity dying alongside the sick. Charity was dead, one chronicler wrote. Do you believe you'd have stayed by your loved one's side, or would fear have pulled you away? And when families falter, the next question is, who do you turn to? The church had always been the answer. Priests promised absolution, last rites, eternal comfort. But priests died just as quickly as their flock. In some towns, there were no clergy left at all. Corpses were buried without candles, without prayers, without the rituals that guaranteed safe passage to heaven. Imagine being raised in a world where salvation depended on those rites and then watching them vanish. Would you still believe? Or would doubt creep in? Some didn't lose faith. They twisted it tighter. Enter the flagellant's bands of men marching half-naked from town to town, whipping their backs bloody, chanting as they went. They believed the plague was God's punishment, and only through shared pain could forgiveness come. Crowds gathered, drawn to the spectacle. Some joined. For a while, these processions were like medieval influencers loud, viral, pulling desperate people into their orbit. But desperation has a darker face, scapegoating. Have you seen how, in modern crises, people grab at conspiracies poisoned vaccines, secret plots, invisible enemies? The Middle Ages had their own version. Rumors spread that Jews had poisoned wells, that outsiders had cursed the land. Pogroms followed massacres of Jewish communities. Entire neighborhoods burned, thousands murdered. Think about that. A population dying from the same plague, turning on their neighbors because fear demanded someone to blame. If you lived then, terrified and grieving, do you think you'd have joined the mob, or tried to stop it? Not all responses were violence. Some were almost surreal. People carried bouquets of flowers, believing sweet smells could block disease. They stuffed herbs into beaked masks, what we now call plague doctor costumes. It looks theatrical to us, even absurd. But isn't it strangely familiar? We had our masks too. Our hand sanitizer rituals. Our bleach wipes and our miracle cures spreading on social media. You've seen shelves emptied of toilet paper, people stockpiling garlic, or swallowing strange potions. Different century, same instinct, anything to feel safer. And then there was economy and survival. With so many dead, villages emptied. Farms went untended. Fields lay fallow. But if you survived, for the first time, your labor was valuable. Lords needed workers desperately. Wages rose. People who had been bound by feudal obligations found leverage. The old order cracked. Do you notice the irony? Out of mass death, new freedoms were born. How often has history reshaped itself on the back of catastrophe? Yet beyond wages and politics, there was the psychological scar. Imagine being a child in this world. Every day you see carts of bodies, hear prayers whispered with terror, smell decay in the streets. You are told the plague is God's wrath, or demons, or poison. Your world shrinks to fear. That fear never leaves you. Even if you survive, you grow into adulthood with the knowledge that life is fragile, that death is never far. It shaped art, literature, even humor. Skeletons danced with the living in paintings that dance macabre, reminding everyone that death was. Always waiting. Now let's step into a church together. The incense burns thick, trying to mask the stench. The priest prays at the altar, but his eyes flick nervously to the coughing congregation. Outside, flagellants chant and bleed. In the Jewish quarter, families huddle, waiting for the next attack. And above it all, the bells toll, over and over, a soundscape of despair. Let's pause here. When your world is collapsing, where do you turn? To faith? To science? To rumor? To violence? These are not medieval questions only. They are human questions. Remember the past few years. Think of how fast blame spread, how quickly doubt rose, how people clung to rituals, both helpful and absurd. The Black Death is not some alien event, it's a mirror. The faces in it look frightened, desperate, confused, just like ours can. So, when we talk about the social and religious impact of the plague, we are not simply listing history. We are looking at ourselves under pressure. And the hardest part to admit? If you were there, you might have acted the same. Stand still for a moment. Look around your village, your city, your countryside. Half of the people you once knew are gone. The houses are shuttered. The fields are empty. The streets quieter than you ever thought possible. The Black Death has finished its first sweep, and the silence is louder than the screams ever were. Estimates vary, but let's be plain. In some regions, 1 out of every 3 people is dead. In others, half. In the worst-hit towns, it feels like 9 out of the... Time quans. Whole villages vanish. Chroniclers write of farms with ploughs abandoned mid-furrow, oxen still yoked, grass growing over tools. Imagine walking past an entire row of cottages and realizing every door is locked from the outside, because no one came back to open them. What happens to society when so many are gone? That's where the story shifts from tragedy into something stranger. Because death is not the only outcome. Change is. First, think of labor. Before the plague, peasants were bound by the old feudal system. You worked the land because your lord said so, not because you had a choice. But after the plague, workers are scarce. Fields lie empty. Lords look out at acres of untended land and realize they need hands desperately. And suddenly, if you're a survivor, you matter. Your labor has value. You can bargain. You can say, I will work, but you will pay me more. And often, they had no choice but to agree. Can you picture the shift? Ordinary peasants, who once had little voice, discovering leverage for the first time. For centuries, power flowed downward from nobles and kings. After the plague, for a brief moment, it began to flow upward, from those who survived, those who could still bend their backs to the plough. Of course, not everyone welcomed this. In England, the Crown grew alarmed at rising wages. The Statute of Labourers of 1351 tried to freeze pay at pre-plague levels, declaring that workers had no right to demand more. But paper laws cannot resurrect the dead, and empty stomachs don't obey proclamations. Workers moved where conditions were better, fueling resentment, riots, and decades later, the peasants' revolt. If you've ever heard leaders today complain about inflation, labor shortages, or people not wanting to work, you're hearing an echo of 1349. Different world, same arguments. And then there's land. Think of the inheritance chaos. Families cut in half meant that land often passed unexpectedly. A younger son who never expected an acre suddenly held hundreds. Widows inherited property, sometimes for the first time in their lives. Wealth shifted, not because of merit or battle, but because death shuffled the deck. Have you seen how inheritance booms ripple after modern pandemics or crises? The same pattern. Some lose everything. Others suddenly rise. But the economic collapse wasn't just fields and wages. Cities suffered in their own way. Merchants lost customers. Workshops closed. Skilled craftsmen, masons, weavers, blacksmiths vanished, leaving holes that took decades to refill. At the same time, those who survived sometimes found themselves richer. If half the population dies, wealth doesn't vanish with them, it redistributes. Imagine waking up to find you're the last heir of 3 dead cousins. Grief. Yes, but also opportunity. How would you carry that double weight? There's a darker side. 2. Scarcity drove prices up. Grain, meat, cloth all became harder to find. In some regions, famine and plague marched hand in hand. And when resources shrink, tempers flare. Do you think people suddenly became generous, united in grief? Some did. Yes. Many did not. The scramble for survival bred suspicion, theft, violence. The social contract was not strengthened by plague. It was strained to breaking. And then, the children, or rather, the missing children. Demography is not just numbers, it is future generations. With so many dead, birth rates plummeted. Communities that once bustled with new life fell quiet. Entire age groups were thinned. Decades later, Europe still felt the absence. Fewer workers, fewer soldiers, fewer voice. Time wanes. Think of a school half empty for years, or a workplace where half the desks never refill. That gap shapes the culture long after the sickness is gone. But here's the paradox. Out of devastation came possibility. With fewer mouths to feed, survivors sometimes ate better than before. Meat and bread reached tables that once held only thin porridge. With labor shortages, innovation stirred new farming methods, new tools, new ideas about land ownership. Europe would eventually crawl toward the Renaissance, fueled in part by this forced restructuring. Death, ironically, became the midwife of change. Now, I want you to pause and reflect. What does this remind you of? Have you seen how modern economies bend under pandemic strain? Think back-empty grocery shelves, factories closing, governments debating stimulus. We saw labor shortages too, workers demanding better pay, people reassessing what their work was worth. Sound familiar? The echoes of the 14th century reach right into your own memory. But ask yourself, if you were there, would you have seen it as opportunity, or only as loss? Would you have taken a chance to demand more from your Lord, knowing it could bring punishment? Would you have clung to your land, even if you couldn't farm it, just to keep a sense of security? The Black Death was not just a biological event, it was an economic revolution hidden inside a catastrophe. It shattered hierarchies, forced change, shifted wealth, and rebalanced power in ways no king ever could. The dead shaped the lives of the living, not just in grief, but in the very structure of society. So as you stand now, in the silence after the storm, with fields overgrown and houses abandoned, consider the strange truth: the plague did not just take. It gave, in cruel ways. It gave opportunity, leverage, and a chance, however unwanted, to rewrite the rule. Time wons, and that is perhaps the most unsettling lesson of all. Because catastrophe doesn't only end things, it remakes them. Let's step into the world of medicine in 1348. Imagine you've developed a painful swelling under your arm. Your head burns with fever. Your breath comes short and ragged. You call for help. But who arrives at your door? Not someone with antibiotics or vaccines. Not someone with gloves, masks, or monitors. What comes instead is a physician in a long robe, carrying a pouch of herbs, a scalpel, and a collection of ideas that sound more like poetry than science. At the time, doctors believed in the theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Sickness, they taught, came from imbalance. Too much blood? Too much bile? The cure was to restore harmony. How? By draining the excess. So when you lie there with buboes swelling, the doctor sets to work with knives and leeches, bleeding you in hopes of balance. Imagine being feverish, terrified, and watching your life drip into a bowl. Do you feel cured or just weaker? Others believed in miasmath bad air theory. To them, plague floated in corrupted breezes. Cure the air, cure the disease. They burned juniper, rosemary, frankincense, filling rooms with choking smoke to purify what could not be seen. Did it help? Not against bacteria. But perhaps it comforted people to believe they were doing something, anything. Isn't that familiar? Think of the remedies that surface in modern crises: miracle supplements, detox potions, ultraviolet lamps. People reach for control, even when control is illusion. And then there were the more bizarre remedies. Some prescribed drinking potions made of crushed emeralds or powdered herbs. Others suggested rubbing onions or even animal excrement on buboes. Certain doctors warned against bathing, fearing that open pores would let disease seep in. Imagine that, no bathing, in a world already reeking of filth. Do you think that made life easier or harder for the people who had to live beside you? Of course, we cannot forget the figure that has become iconic, the plague doctor. Long cloak, leather gloves, wide-brimmed hat, and most striking of all, the mask with a curved beak stuffed full of herbs, flowers, and vinegar-soaked cloth. To modern eyes, it looks theatrical, almost comical. To medieval eyes, it was serious protection. They thought the beak filtered poisoned air. In truth, it filtered nothing. But pause here, doesn't it remind you of masks today? We wore ours for real protection. They wore theirs for imagined protection. And yet, in both cases, the mask became a symbol, a sign of a world under siege. Medicine did not only feel sometimes harmed. Bleeding, purging, and lancing buboes often left patients weaker, their bodies unable to fight. But what choice did they have? When the choice is do nothing or do something, most people choose something. Would you have? If the only hope offered to you was leeches or smoke, would you have turned them away or clutched at them desperately? And not all responses were medical. Some were spiritual remedies. Pilgrimages multiplied. People walked miles to shrines, seeking miracles. Holy water was sprinkled. Relics were kissed. Saints were invoked. When the physical world gave no answers, people sought them in the divine. You've seen this too, haven't you? When modern medicine moves slowly, people look to faith, to alternative cures, to rituals that give comfort even if not cure. Communities tried collective measures as well. In some cities, Officials ordered quarantines. The very word comes from the Italian 40 giorni, 40 days. Ships arriving in Venice were kept offshore for 40 days to see if plague appeared among the crew. It wasn't perfect, but it was one of the first attempts at organized public health. If you lived in 2020, you know how familiar that word feels. Quarantine. Isolation. Stay away until it's safe. How did you handle it when your world asked you to wait inside? Now imagine 40 days in a world with no Netflix, no phone, no distraction, but prayer and fear. Still, for all their efforts, most treatments failed. The plague was too fast, too deadly, too invisible. Doctors died alongside their patients. Priests, midwives, healers, none had answers. And in the face of helplessness, people improvised. They did what humans always do. They tried everything. Burned incense, drank strange tonics, fled to the countryside, shut doors against neighbors. Or, in despair, did nothing at all. Pause with me here. When you think of medieval medicine, maybe you laugh at leeches, at herbs, at beaked masks. But ask yourself, a few centuries from now, will people laugh at some of the things we tried, at our frantic buying of hand sanitizer, our half-understood cures, our endless debates over masks and mandates? Every age believes it is rational. Every age is also desperate. And yet out of this chaos, something did grow. Medicine began, slowly, to shift. The sheer failure of traditional methods forced questions. Could the humours really explain this? Could bad air account for so much? Seeds of doubt planted here would bloom centuries later into scientific revolution. The plague broke trust in doctors. Yes, but it also forced medicine to evolve. Sometimes progress begins not with answers, but with catastrophic failure. So, as you lie feverish on your straw mat, or as you walk masked through modern streets, you are part of the same story. People trying to live, to fight, to hope, even with tools that are imperfect. People choosing action over silence, ritual over despair, mask over nothing. Would you have done differently? Or would you, like them, have tried whatever was offered herb smoke, a pilgrimage, 40 days of waiting just to believe you had a chance? And yet, even after all the bleeding, the smoke, the masks, and the prayer most of it failed. The plague kept killing. Medicine couldn't stop it. Priests couldn't stop it. Laws and quarantines only slowed it, never ended it. But the story doesn't end with bodies. The story continues in the minds of the survivors. Because when you live through something that wipes away half your world, it doesn't just scar your skin, it scars your imagination. Think of it. How do you carry forward when every street corner holds a memory of death? When every church bell reminds you of the hundreds who never returned? Trauma demands expression. And in the 14th century, that expression spilled into culture. Start with art. Before the Black Death, medieval art was often idealized saints glowing in gold leaf, heaven painted in bright blues and reds, a world of divine order. After the plague, skeletons began to dance across walls. The dance macabre, the dance of death, emerged as a common theme. Picture murals of kings, peasants, bishops, all led hand in hand by grinning skeletons, as if to say, death makes equals of us all. Have you ever seen a meme online that jokes we all end up the same? That was their version dark humor carved in fresco and woodcut. Literature changed, too. Boccaccio's Decameron, written in plague-struck Florence, begins with friends fleeing the city to tell stories in isolation. It's not unlike us swapping tales on video calls during lockdown, clinging to words and company while the world outside feels dangerous. Do you remember scrolling through stories, jokes, songs during quarantine? That impulse to use narrative as shelter is not new. It was alive in 1348 too. Religion also shifted. Faith cracked but didn't disappear. For some, the Church's failure to stop the plague fueled cynicism, even quiet rebellion. People asked, if priests die like us, do they hold special power at all? Seeds of doubt planted here would later grow into the Reformation. For others, faith deepened. Pilgrimages increased. Donations to monasteries rose. People clung harder to religion, not looser. Isn't that familiar? In our own time, some people turned to science, others doubled down on faith, and many balanced both. Culture itself bent around the trauma. Humor turned darker, more morbid. Songs, plays, sermons all spoke of death with a bluntness that would shock earlier generations. Imagine children skipping rope to rhymes about roses and ashes, yes. Even that nursery rhyme, Ring Around the Rosy, is sometimes linked to plague folklore. Do you find it eerie how even play can absorb catastrophe? But the legacy is not only despair. There is a strange, paradoxical gift hidden in catastrophe. It clears ground for something new. The plague, by ripping apart old systems, forced Europe into transformation. With feudal bonds weakened and new wealth distributed, space opened for innovation. Universities began to expand their studies beyond theology. Artists experimented. Thinkers dared to question. A century later, the Renaissance blossomed, a rebirth of art and science. And though the plague was not its only cause, it was part of the soil in which that rebirth grew. Would the Renaissance have happened the same way without the Black Death? It's impossible to say. But you can see the line, death making way for new life. Now, think of your own century. Pandemics reshaped culture too, didn't they? Music, film, memes, even the way we talk about health all bent under the weight of recent years. You probably saw art that reflected isolation, jokes about masks, stories about survival. We express what we endure. Medieval people painted skeletons. We posted TikToks. Different medium, same instinct. Isn't it strange how humor becomes a survival tool? Another long-term legacy was memory itself. The Black Death never truly left Europe's mind. For centuries afterward, any new outbreak of plague triggered not just fear, but memory, the deep terror of 1348. Whole generations grew up under its shadow. That's how trauma works, it echoes. It repeats. It informs how you see every future crisis. You've felt that too, haven't you? A cough in 2021 didn't sound the same as a cough in 2019. Memory reshapes perception. The medieval world learned that lesson early and never forgot it. Even architecture changed. Cities rethought space. Some towns widened streets, built new cemeteries, planned differently because of the nightmare they had lived. Do you notice the parallel? After pandemics now, we talk about ventilation, about outdoor spaces, about redesigning buildings for health. Again, different tools, same thought. How do we build so that this never happens again? So what is the cultural legacy of the Black Death? It is twofold, a deep scar and a strange spark. Scar, in the fear that lingered, the darker art, the suspicion of institutions. Spark, in the way it broke the old order, pushed people to imagine new ways of living, and eventually opened the door to Renaissance brilliance. Out of ash, flowers. Out of silence, song. Out of horror, transformation. But let's bring it back to you. Imagine surviving the pandemic of your own time, then looking back decades later. What art will your generation leave behind? What stories will be remembered? Will people laugh at the way we panicked? Or will they see our memes, our music, our improvisations as the nervous system of survival? History suggests it will be both. The Black Death teaches us that culture is not just decoration, it is therapy. It is how we metabolize fear. And it is how we build bridges into futures we cannot yet see. So when you picture skeletons dancing with kings, don't just think of medieval superstition. Think of it as their version of a meme, a grim reminder that laughter and death walk together. Think of it as their way of saying, we endured, we remember, we still create. And ask yourself this: what will your culture look like in the centuries to come, when future historians peer back at us? By now, you might be thinking, this is history. It's distant. It can't touch me. But lean in for a moment. Because the story of the Black Death isn't just about medieval alleys and flickering candles, it's about you. It's about what people do when fear and uncertainty wrap around their lives. And if you've lived through recent years, you already know more about the 14th century than you realize. Think back. Empty shelves. Panic buying. The rush for masks. For medicine. For anything that promised safety. Now picture Florence, 1348. People clutching bunches of flowers, believing sweet scents would protect them. Priests waving incense. Families clinging to charms. Different items. Same instinct. You do what you can, even when what you can do is symbolic. Tell me, when you stocked up in those early weeks, did you truly believe you'd run out? Or did it just feel safer to take control of something? Remember the swirl of rumors in your own time social media, full of miracle cures, conspiracy theories, scapegoats. Now step into a medieval marketplace. No smartphones here, but rumors flew just as fast, from one fearful mouth to another. Jews poisoning wells. God's wrath. Bad air drifting in from the east. Doesn't it feel familiar? The tools have changed, but the human urge to explain, to blame, to cling to a story it hasn't moved an inch in 700 years. And what about trust? You saw it too. Governments fumbling, experts disagreeing, institutions strained. How quickly did your own faith in authority rise or fall depending on who you listened to? The 14th century had its own crisis of trust. Priests who were supposed to stand firm died like everyone else. Doctors bled their patients dry. Kings fled to the countryside. For the common people, it must have felt like betrayal. When the leaders vanish or fail, who do you trust? Yourself? Your neighbors? No one at all? Even the idea of quarantine has echoes. You were told to stay home, to isolate, to wait. In Venice, ships were held offshore for 40 days before passengers were allowed to disembark. 40 giorni. 40 days. Imagine that. Sailors staring at the city they longed for, forbidden to step ashore until the danger passed. You know that feeling, don't you? Looking out a window, wanting normal life, waiting for permission to rejoin it. Different harbour, same ache. And then, labour. You've seen the Great Resignation. Workers rethinking their worth, demanding more, refusing to accept poor conditions. The Black Death had its version. Survivors discovered they were valuable. Wages rose. Peasants walked away from lords. Laws tried to pin them down. But people had tasted leverage. And once tasted, it's hard to spit out. Isn't that true today too? Once you realize your life is more than labor, how do you go back to chains? What about memory? Even now, when someone coughs in a crowded room, doesn't a tiny flicker of unease still rise in your chest? Multiply that by a lifetime. Medieval survivors never looked at sickness the same again. They grew up with plague-haunted minds, just as you and I carry the shadows of our own pandemic. That's what trauma does, it lingers, reshaping how we respond to every future threat. Do you think our grandchildren will feel echoes when the next crisis comes? And let's not forget scapegoating. You saw how quickly suspicion turned against strangers, outsiders, anyone different. Blame spread almost as fast as the sickness itself. The Middle Ages were brutal in this. Entire Jewish communities massacred, outsiders hunted, people punished not for what they had done, but for what others feared they might have done. Today, we may not burn villages, but hate crimes rise. Online mobs target scapegoats, and conspiracy-driven anger becomes deadly. The script hasn't changed much. There's also resilience. Because you times there's your own 65s, the Black Death shattered families, faith, and systems. But survivors adapted. They rebuilt. They even found ways to laugh again, dark though the humor was. Think of the art that came out of your own lockdowns, the creativity, the absurd videos, the sudden bursts of song from balconies. Humans don't just curl inward, they create. They always have. Would you have found a way to laugh, even then, surrounded by silence? I suspect you would. Perhaps the most haunting parallel is this: the plague was not just a medieval event. It was global. It moved across continents, carried by trade and connection. And so did ours. The more connected we are, the faster our shadows spread. Airplanes, caravans, ships, the vehicle changes. The pattern does not. Do you feel safer knowing this, or more vulnerable? But here's the truth. The Black Death teaches us that, even after unimaginable loss, societies change, adapt, and sometimes even improve. The survivors of the 14th century planted the seeds of the Renaissance. They didn't plan it. They didn't sit down and say, "Now we rebuild better." They simply lived, demanded more, created, and slowly reshaped their world. Out of ash, a new fire rose. Doesn't that make you wonder, what seeds are we planting now, without even realizing it? So let me ask you this. When future historians look back on our own time, what will they see? Will they see division, fear, and mistrust? Yes. But will they also see resilience, adaptation, and creativity? Almost certainly. We are never only one thing. Neither were they. The Black Death is not only a medieval tragedy. It is a mirror. When you lean in close, you see yourself reflected in the terrified eyes of a Florentine mother, in the desperate prayers of a Parisian priest, in the weary bargaining of an English peasant. They are not distant. They are us. Different streets, same humanity. Different century, same fear. And so the question lingers, heavy as the toll of a bell. When the next shadow comes, and it will, how will you respond? The bells have quieted now. The smoke from funeral pyres has drifted into the sky, faded into memory. The carts no longer rumble through the streets quite as often. Life, in its stubborn way, begins to creep back in. A child's laugh, a market stall reopening, a plough pulled once again through the soil. After the Black Death, nothing was the same, and yet everything had to continue. That is the strange paradox of catastrophe. It ends lives. It ends families. It ends worlds. But it does not end the world. For the survivors. The hardest truth is also the simplest one. The sun still rises. The earth still turns. And life, however scarred, continues. So pause with me here. We've walked through alleys thick with filth, stood at the walls of besieged cities, watched families fracture, seen priests falter, marched with flagellants, buried countless dead. We've also seen the survivors eat better, earn more, inherit land, paint skeletons on walls, tell stories in exile, and, eventually, plant the seeds of the Renaissance. What do you take away from all of this? That humans are fragile? Yes. But also that humans are endlessly adaptive. Think of your own time. You've seen shelves emptied, masks pulled tight, trust shaken, routines broken, and yet here you are, listening, breathing, carrying on. Do you feel a little closer now to that Florentine baker or that London widow? You should. The centuries collapse when we look at fear straight in the face. Their world is not so distant. Their questions are our questions. How do we survive? Who do we trust? What meaning do we make of suffering? If the Black Death teaches anything, it is that catastrophe is both an ending and a beginning. It destroys, but it also remakes. It breaks trust, but it also pushes us to question and rebuild. It takes lives, but it also shifts the living into new patterns, new freedoms, new possibilities. Would Europe have birthed the Renaissance without the plague? Perhaps, but not in the same way. Without the trauma, without the shuffling of wealth, without the deep scars in memory, the art and science that followed might not have burned so brightly. Out of darkness came light, however reluctant. And so too for us. When your grandchildren look back at this century, what will they see? A time of fear? Yes, but also a time of resilience, of creativity, of adaptation. The echoes will linger just as plague bells echoed in every cough for medieval survivors. But so will the sparks. And maybe that is the most human thing of all, to take ashes and make soil, to take endings and make beginnings. Now, let the weight of history settle into your chest like a slow breath. You've walked through the darkest corridors of the 14th century tonight, and you've come out the other side. You've seen death, but you've also seen endurance. You've seen despair, but also the flicker of humor, of art, of survival. And perhaps, if you're still awake, you feel the gentle thread tying you to those who lived long before you. Different streets, same humanity. Different century, same fear. If your eyes are heavy now, let them close. Let the images of skeletons dancing fade into shadows. Let the tolling bells soften into silence. Rest, knowing that even in history's darkest nights, people found ways to keep going, and so do we. And if you're still with me, awake, listening, thank you. You've stayed through and how. Time dated 65's 2 hours, walking step by step through one of humanity's most harrowing chapters. If you'd like to walk with me again, through other forgotten corridors of history, you know where to find me. There are always more nights, more stories, more echoes between past and present. For now, rest easy. The plague bells are behind us. Ahead lies only quiet. Good night.